To understand Spring and why do we need Spring, let's take a look at this very simple example. So in this case, we have an application. Let's say we call it the Spring application. And what we do here is we are creating an object, new object, hello world. Let's go to that object C, which has only one method. And then we are calling the hello world of that object, hello world method of that object. So what is the problem with this app? This app has several problems if we decide to use that at the enterprise level, right? Let's say we have a large project and this application has several problems. The first problem is the tight coupling. But what's that mean? So for example, let's say that here we are using the hello world implementation, right? But later we may decide to change the implementation. So for example, later we may decide to have another version of it and the hello world version 2. And here we need to, what we need to do in that case, so we need to go to every class and then we need to manually change the implementation to hello world 2 because implementation has changed. That's the first one. The second one, it's the hard to test. Why it's hard to test? Because we are creating here a new object, and if let's say that this object is calling the database and this object is calling some external system, then in that case we will not be able to mock this object, so we'll not be able to test it as we test usually. So that's another problem, right? It's hard to test. The third one is that the no centralized configuration, so which means that the object creation, they are scattered across our application, throughout our application. For example, let's say that we have 100 classes and we have 100 services and 200 repositories and so on, 200 DAO layers, and for each one, our object creation is scattered throughout our application. And the next one is that it's hard to manage the life cycle. So what's that mean? It means that we need to, in our case, right, we need to care about the object creation, initialization, destroying, cleaning up the resources. For all that, we need to do that. We need to think about those problems when we have a large project. And because all of this, our application has a poor scalability, right? So if we want to quickly spin up a new project and it's a large project and we want to add more and more resources and so on, we want to add more and more code to that application, then in that case it will be hard to scale. So considering all of this, so what we do? So what would be the solution? The solution is to use the inversion of control. Inversion of control, it's basically that in giving the responsibility for the creating an object and the injecting to our whatever we need, giving that responsibility to some external framework, right? In our case, that framework is Spring, but there are other alternatives. So what we do here is we are using the IOC container. In Spring, container means that the place where the objects are created and where the objects are created and where the objects are injected to the whatever they are required. So in our case, what we do is, instead of creating an object, so what we do here is we are creating, let me copy paste this code. So what we do here is we are, instead of creating a new object, we are asking that Spring from the container to give us that object, right? So what we have here is we have a bin.xml file where we are defining our beans. Beans in Spring means basically an object, right? So for example, in this case, let's go to our configuration so that you can see the files. We have several files here, right? The first one is that we have pom.xml. So for build, we are using a Maven, and the only dependency that we have is the Spring framework and the Spring context. And the next one is that we have bin.xml. So no one is using the XML configuration in real projects anymore. But for sake of understanding, let's start with defining our bin in the XML, right? So what we do here is we are creating in bin.xml, we are creating our first bin. Let's call it hello bin, and the class is for that is hello world. And for the property, we are setting the value welcome to Spring Core. So for that, let's go to our hello world. So for the message, we are setting the value in our bin.xml. So that's it. That's all we need to do. And after that, so what it does is, we are creating an application context. So we are creating an application context using our bin.xml, and the Spring container, or the IOC container, what it does is it creates all the beans and it prepares that. And after that, we can, from that context, we can get whatever bean we want, right? So here we are getting the bean, we are getting the hello bean, and we are casting that to the hello world. Let's run this. And as you can see here, this is our first Spring application. So what we did is all the shortcomings that we have using the regular Java without the framework, which means the tight coupling, it's hard to test, there is no centralized configuration. We are outsourcing all those responsibilities to a Spring framework here.